Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I want to first off by thanking all of you for the support you showed our family during these difficult days. It seems like just yesterday I was up here delivering a eulogy for my mother. And sadly, in just over a year, my brother and I have had to say our final goodbye to our father. Much like I said about my mother, our dad was much more than just a victim of cancer. Summing up what a man our father was in a simple speech is a difficult task for sure. And I think the best way to approach this is by telling tales. What better way to memorialize an Irishman than through stories? My hope is that through these anecdotes, we can all celebrate the life of a man who loved our mother and raised my brother and me. And since my dad would be keeping me honest, that is the grammatically correct way to say it. It is not always my brother and I. My mother used to say that every day was a science lesson in the O'Shea household. Since physics explains how the world around us works, and with my dad being a physics teacher, it meant he was able to find a science lesson in just about any aspect of life. I remember when I was a young child, probably 6 or 7, there was a glass sitting on the counter, full to the brim with liquid. And in the liquid were some ice cubes, cresting the surface like small icebergs. My father asked me, what would happen as that ice melts? Seeing the glass was already full of ice and hadn't melted yet, I came to the natural conclusion that as the ice melted, the water level would increase and subsequently spill over the sides and soak the counter. My father smiled and asked me if I'd be willing to bet $1 on it. Being that I was 6 and I was pretty sure I knew everything, I gladly accepted the challenge. How foolish was my dad to so easily let his son rob him of $1. So as the ice melted, it became painfully obvious that the water level was remaining the same. Being the young and immature kid that I was, I pouted and stormed off to my room to scrounge up enough change to make $1. As I returned to the kitchen, money in hand, ready to make good on my gambling debt, my dad explained that he really didn't want my $1. And instead proceeded to ask me if I knew why that happened. Obviously I did. I was 6. Before I knew it, Dad was busy explaining that the volume of the solid ice submerged was equal to the volume of the liquid displaced, and that as the ice level melted, the level of the liquid remained the same. In essence, my dad had explained Archimedes' principle to me. I can't think of many other 6-year-olds that knew that, and actually I can't think of many adults that could explain it. Even when we were very young, my dad didn't hesitate to explain things. When my brother was 4, he noticed Dad was working at his desk. Being the mischievous child he was, he decided he was going to creep into the room, ever so quietly, and then scare Dad with a loud and furious yell. He got within a few steps of his prey, and then Dad said, without raising his head, "Hello, Tom." Thoroughly amazed and most assuredly upset that his plan had been foiled, he asked, "How could you see me?" As opposed to the standard answers a father could give a toddler, such as, "Oh, I see everything," or "I have eyes in the back of my head," he instead decided to explain the concept of peripheral vision. He had him hold his arms out to the sides and slowly bring them in, until he could see them at the corners of his eyes. Then he went on to explain the difference between rod and cone cells in the eyes and what their functions are. Pretty certain that made Tom the only kindergartner who knew not only how to say the word peripheral, but what it meant. And it probably shouldn't come as any surprise that Tom grew up to be a scientist. You know, I can't say that I ever remember my father raising my voice to either Tom or me. Now, that isn't because Tom and I are infallible or that we never made mistakes. That couldn't be further from the truth. Instead, it speaks to our father's astonishing level of patience. I remember the morning that my brother drove his car into the driveway. Front end smashed, hood bent, and fluids dripping from the undercarriage. He had fallen asleep at the wheel, careened off the road, and crashed into a lamppost. Thankfully, he was uninjured, and he was able to drive the car the rest of the way home. Upon seeing the car, my dad remained quiet, and I remember waiting to see what his reaction would be, certain that this would be the point when he would yell and holler. Instead, Tom and Dad rebuilt the entire front end of the vehicle in the driveway in near silence, with the help of Ronnie Gibbs. Nary a sound was made, save for the uttering of my father for Tom to pass him a tool or to hold something in the end. Never once did he belittle Tom, never once did he scold him for the accident. He didn't accuse him of wrongdoing or tell him of failure was a powerful message for me, one that left me with the understanding that I could make a mistake and not be afraid of an angered and irrational response from my father. As I grew up, I found my dad knew the answers to most of my questions. It became somewhat of a joke for my mother that if Tom or I asked her a question and she didn't know the answer to it, "Go ask your father" became synonymous with "just go look it up." The greatest thing about Dad's seamlessly never-ending reservoir of knowledge was that he was never hesitant or resistant to share. I can remember there were times when I'd be working in the computer room downstairs, and I'd come across something I didn't understand. I'd think to myself, Dad will know the answer to this. So my next step was to bound up the steps into the kitchen. I'd often begin asking the question even before I entered the room, but by the time I made it to the center of the kitchen, I'd arrive, just in time to see Dad pausing whatever he was doing, whether it was reading a sci-fi novel or finishing a crossword puzzle, turning to face me so he could figure out what I was blabbering about. I'd then again ask my question, he'd answer it, and then I'd be on my way, head back downstairs, and Dad would return to what he was doing. It never occurred to me that I might be interrupting something he was doing, or that he would be too busy to listen to me. When my brother was 8, he once ran into the living room during a party, which all our family friends were there, chatting and enjoying the get-together. Tom exclaimed to Dad that he had something extremely important Dad just needed to see. Without hesitation, Dad got up, left the other adults, and followed his son to see what he was so excited about. He didn't dismiss Tom. He didn't tell him that the adults were talking and he should leave. He never once told Tom or me that what he was doing was too important to take the time to help us. And it was that selflessness that I would later learn was one of his trademarks, and that anyone who got to know him loved him about. Another remarkable thing about my father was his ability to fix just about anything. Of course, it did help that he had his own hardware store in his garage. I was always amazed to learn how many decks he had built on Long Island, how many sets he built for the school, and the houses he constructed out in the Hamptons with Uncle Ken. Around the house, Dad was capable of fixing just about anything that broke, from replacing doors to windows to rewiring electrical fixtures. Now, as he got older, it did take a bit longer for the projects around the house to be finished, and Mom had to remind him on more than a few occasions, but they did eventually get done. I remember he told me a story about when he went next door to tutor Noreen and Deirdre in math. As he was helping them, he noticed one of them struggling to open the closet door. She had to wrench the handle with all her might, pull up, and then violently swing the door open. My dad inquired as to what was wrong with the door. "Oh, don't worry, Uncle Patty, that's just the way it is," was the response he got. Obviously, that didn't sit well with my father. A quick trip back to the house, he returned with a few tools, and in a few minutes, the door was miraculously fixed. A few days later, he was over to Murdoch's house once again. As he watched Uncle John place his hands on the doorknob and brace himself in the inevitable struggle with the door, my dad couldn't get the words out fast enough. Uncle John threw all his might into the door and threw himself across the room as the door swung open with ease. By the time Uncle John had landed, my dad was able to say, "Oh, I fixed the door." Uncle John looked back at my father incredulously and replied, "You don't say." I could spend the next few days relaying the stories I have about my father, as could Tom, as could all of us who knew him well. I hope this is just the beginning. I hope I get to hear more stories about my dad. I hope that everyone continues to tell the tales they have about him. Let's all remember him fondly. Was he perfect? No, just as none of us are. But what made him different was that he was truly the most humble man I've ever met. Unlike many other humble people who mask their boastful comments and sarcasm or jest, I never heard him do that. In fact, the only thing I ever heard him be prideful about was his son. He once told me that he understood that pride was a sin, and at times he would feel guilty about being proud of how he was. As I've been reminiscing and reliving my days with him in my head, I can't find a bad memory. I'm left only with happiness and fond memories. And in a way that makes it harder to say goodbye because I want the good times to continue. But I also understand that all good things must come to an end. And if I can look back on my life and had not a single regret and in regards to the relationship with my father, then I know I have to be eternally grateful. I love you, Dad. You were the best father Tom and I could have asked for, an amazing husband to mine, and a true and loyal friend.